must come at you with the craziest stuff.
Well, we don't have a choice about whether we get involved in conflict usually, but we do have a choice about how that we respond to it and what process we use. And typically, most people start by trying to work it out themselves. And if that breaks down, the question is what next? And the what next in my line of work in terms of representing condominium associations and homeowners associations is typically getting an attorney involved and saying, here is the law and here is what you, the adversary, typically an owner, but sometimes other corporations, here is what you need to do in light of the law. Sometimes, though, there is a better way, a more efficient way, and one that produces better outcomes. Again, it's a process, a different process that often produces better outcomes, and that is mediation. And what I wanted to talk about today is not the legal practice that I'm engaged in and will continue to be engaged in, but a new line of work that I'm going to be doing in the future, which is helping condominium associations and their owners to resolve conflicts through mediation.
Now, mediation is becoming a little bit sexier, I suppose. I mean, we've heard about it in divorces and things of that nature, because it doesn't necessarily pit two people against each other in this win or lose situation. Is that a fair way to describe it?
It is a fair way to describe it. What it's meant to do is refocus the parties away from winning and losing and more on resolving a conflict in the best possible way.
With a satisfactory outcome to everybody. Absolutely.
And it usually involves neither party getting everything that they want, but both parties get a lot of what they want. And that really is the key, is that a mediator will be able to facilitate communication between the parties, which is often broken down. As we all know, you get involved in a conflict or a dispute with someone, and the communication breaks down, emotions start to take over, and you stop listening and you stop hearing, more importantly, each other, what your interests are, what the issues are really, and it breaks down, and you're not even having a productive discussion anymore about how to constructively resolve the conflict.
I think that's what happens when you talk to your spouse after a few minutes, isn't it?
Sometimes, unfortunately, but in my case, thankfully, that doesn't happen often.
Too
but
often.
It does happen.
That's right.
Maybe we need to hire a mediator, but I don't think
they had
like
that. It was called the
mediator.
marriage ref, right? Didn't they have a Seinfeld show called the marriage ref?
Right. And I don't think that you can mediate your own marriage dispute, though. I don't think that would work.
All right, kids, come in. We're going to have you guys solve the problem.
The jury of the children. Love it.
So, Kevin, when somebody maybe explain, what are some issues that you have tried to attack or mediate that people find themselves in when it comes to condominiums and owners of condominiums and, I suppose, builders? I mean, there's so many people involved.
Well, people have to live in close proximity to each other in condominiums and homeowners associations, obviously. And so it really depends on whether it's a conflict between two owners, an upstairs-downstairs situation, or whether it's a conflict between the association, usually in trying to enforce some rule, and a particular owner that for some reason thinks that they shouldn't be able to enforce it the way that they want. So in either case, I have an example in the article that I had written recently for the King County Bar Bulletin about mediation, which was talking about an association that was trying to enforce a rule, and then the owner came back from an extended vacation and said, this is not, all these fines that you've put on me for violating this rule are not legitimate. And then the association says, yes, they are, and then they are at an impasse. That's a situation in which I often will find is that a mediator coming in at that point in time and trying to explain to the parties what the issues are and what the potential consequences of taking that next step into litigation are, because they are standing at the edge of a cliff, so to speak, of the next step once you reach an impasse like that is either the parties are going to work out some kind of a settlement either on their own or with the assistance of a mediator, or they're going to move into litigation.
What are some of the actual things you see people argue about?
Actual things that people argue about are often
pets.
Yes, often noise and smell are the two big ones that people argue about. Individual owners arguing about is typically one of those two things. Sometimes it goes into bigger issues relating to personality disputes, I would call it, where people actually have a problem with each other, and so they magnify relatively harmless incidents, things of that nature. But it typically does come down to either there's a smoking issue, or there's an incense issue, or there's a barking pet, or there's people that have parties late at night, whatever it may be. There are many different potential sources of conflict when you're talking about people living together in close proximity, often sharing walls, floors, that kind of thing. And so really what I am trying to do in my role as a mediator is not to act as an advocate for one side or the other, but to help the parties come back into looking at it not as a win-lose proposition, but in a more constructive way, trying to reach a resolution rather than trying to win the dispute.
It's like you guys can party till 11, but after that, let's lay off the noise.
There is usually always, in any dispute, there is always room for both sides to compromise, and there's always room to listen.
I think like keep your dog, but give him a bark collar.
Sometimes there are ways to, if one party is willing to move towards the middle and the other party is as well, then you can actually solve the dispute. The problem is that when one or both sides stick to a rigid position and are, I'm right, you're wrong, and I'm going to win. And if they view mediation in that way, then it's not going to be a productive mediation. It's a waste of time.
Well, it would seem that in that case, some people would be more interested in being right than resolving the problem. I mean, I think there are a lot of people out there that are more interested in the integrity of being correct.
Yes, the principle
than getting past it.
And that is what a mediator is in part trying to do, is to trying to lead them away from that perspective and towards a perspective that is more constructive and is saying, instead of looking at this as I am right and I'm going to win, that looking at it as I want to achieve the best possible outcome to resolve this dispute. And one of the attractions of mediation is simply that it offers a relatively quick and cheap way of resolving a dispute, and it's something that
much
both
faster,
parties,
I imagine.
Well, I mean, litigation can take years, and it can on both sides involve thousands of dollars of attorney's fees, and in some instances, there's no other way. When you have a true impasse, when you have clear black and white legal rights that have to be enforced, in some instances, litigation is necessary and correct and proper. But in many other cases, there is a better way, and that's both sides hiring a neutral third party to come in, help them communicate, and to point out some ways in which they might be able to resolve their dispute in a more constructive way.
Sure. Kevin Britt joins us with the law office of Kevin L. Britt. Kevin, in your article, you write that it is difficult, or Mr. Vance had conceded, it's difficult to negotiate with people one dislikes.
Well, you have to try to put that aside, and a good mediator will help you to do that, to say this is not about being best friends with the other side or with your neighbor. Sometimes an easy peace, is all that you can try to achieve. But what a good mediator is trying to do is trying to sow the seeds of future peace between neighbors. It's trying to say that even if you don't like each other, even if you rub each other the wrong way personality-wise, even if you have political or whatever other views that are opposite or that clash, you still have to live together. You live upstairs, they live downstairs, and there needs to be peace. And there cannot be a state of perpetual war. You need to resolve the root causes of the conflict. And in some extreme cases, litigation is necessary to do that and to get the court system and judges involved. But in many other cases, a mediator can help the two sides bring the temperature in the room down, move towards the middle, and reach a compromise solution.
You made a point earlier about personality disputes. How do you mediate? I mean, how does that come up, and how do you end up actually resolving a personality dispute?
You don't. What you do is that there's no way to resolve that fully, except typically mediations are not done with both parties in the same room. I mean, typically it's people in separate rooms, and the mediator is trying to put the other side's position into different words that perhaps would be better received or better understood.
Right.
And it's like a translator almost, in the sense of sometimes with personality conflicts, there's no way for you to hear and really understand what the other person is saying, because those personality conflicts just rub you the wrong way, and there's a breakdown again in communication. What a good mediator is going to try to do is going to try to say, I recognize that there are personality conflicts here that are beyond my ability to remedy. However, that doesn't mean that we can't still resolve the problem and put them aside to the extent that we can and focus on the underlying root cause of the dispute, whatever it may be. And
how
if you can do that,
and then how often do these root causes turn out to be almost petty?
Often, and and usually the personality conflicts are magnifying these disputes. And once that becomes clear, then both parties can at least say, in the interest of just stopping, and because in most instances, these parties are under a great deal of stress for being in a sustained amount of conflict over a long period of time. I often run into situations in which that occurs, and that the person that is calling me is someone who has been in conflict with their neighbor for months up to that point, which is very emotionally draining. I think both sides, can appreciate that there's value in bringing something to a close and moving on with your life.
Yeah, I once lived with I guess you would call her she made sure all the rules were kept. And there was a gal who had a son who lived there, and we had a closed-off parking garage. And he had put his weight bench there because we each had 2 spots. Mm-hmm. And she's like, well, we're not going to use it. So this lady, who I will call the rule, she put the axe down, and everybody said, well, if somebody breaks into our garage and decides to start pumping weights and hurts themselves, we could be sued. Mm. And everybody else in the thing is like, okay, nobody is going to break into our garage to start lifting weights. Mm-hmm. That might be a little crazy, right? Mm-hmm. But you got into these, you had some people who it seemed reasonable, and then she would go back to the CC&Rs and go, well, look, you're not allowed to store stuff in here.
Right.
But it was like, it was very interesting to...
Those are situations in which I can definitely see a mediator being of assistance and saying, what is the intent of the rules? What is the practice in the community? And perhaps, again, a creative solution along the lines of, if there really is any kind of I would call it minimal insurance risk, enhanced insurance risk, perhaps the owner just offers to assume that risk in writing.
Right.
There are always different ways to reach that, an acceptable goal for both sides. And in that instance, the rule enforcing person is essentially saying, I'm concerned about an enhanced risk. And so that's how I would boil that down and try to put aside the fact that she has that personality that perhaps can kind of grate at people.
She wasn't interested in the assumed risk. She was interested in everybody following the rules. That was my perception.
Well, in those instances, you do have a true impasse.